over the last 20 years, including speculating how that curve may look from 21 to 22. To put it real bluntly, Jack, for the last 8 to 10 years, our population growth rate has been about 0.5%. In the 90s, our population growth rate was 1.5%, 3 times that rate. They are projecting essentially for the next 7 years a 1% growth rate, and that seems somewhat radical because that's twice as fast as the last decade. My contention is that twice as fast, or 1%, is still too conservative to how I project my feelings about the growth rate in Santa Fe over the next 7 years.
What do you think? What should we use?
I believe we're going to see a growth rate very similar to what we saw in the 90s, which is more around the 1.5%, including some years that were 2.5%.
Why do you think that?
For 2 main reasons. Well, maybe 3 now with COVID. Demographically speaking, however, it could be argued that as we continue to see ever more baby boomers retiring, and we will not yet see that peak of retirees for another 3 to 4 to 5 years, they are going to find themselves coming to Santa Fe, some portion of them. So that's one perspective. The other is the fact that millennials are even twice as big as a generation than the Gen X. The Gen X being those in the 40s and 50s. So the millennials are bigger than even the boomers. And if we think about the third phenomena, which is COVID, and we see the flight out of major metropolitan areas in America, and potentially even the boomer echo effect, when a boomer moves somewhere, that very often their children follow them, especially when they start breeding and having grandkids, that I believe that we are going to see a growth rate similar to what we have seen in the 90s, which was closer to 1.5%, which is when most of the boomers wound up in Santa Fe. And so Carlos doesn't necessarily disagree with that, and would even be willing to entertain a growth rate that is a little bit more than 1%, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. But I think that he's also decided that we need to be somewhat conservative about that, because if you guess wrong and you're kind of counting on all that money that might come in from that, then the land use department got egg on its face.
Let me ask this question then. Maybe it's obvious. What difference does it make if we overestimate and we say that there's going to be more impact fees than there actually are as time goes on? How are we planning for that? I mean, what planning is going on that's going to take that into consideration?
Yeah, I think generally, whether we overestimate or underestimate, to some degree, it's not it's not the biggest deal, I think, for the different departments, because the departments are not really using this as a planning document as much as a document to figure out what kinds of projects are eligible and kind of justifying impact fee collection. And so to some degree, it's not the largest issue. Again, it's not going to be a make or break. It's not going to change the ways that groups are able to use, spend, or calculate impact fees. One of the things that staff wanted to be especially conservative about was kind of balancing where we in Santa Fe, and especially developers in Santa Fe, see our growth going, with where groups like the Metropolitan Planning Organization in Santa Fe and where groups like UNM see our growth moving. And right now, the census, the MPO, and UNM are all seeing our growth being fairly stagnant and growing at around that 0.5 or the 0.5% annual growth. However, if we do bring in kind of recent building permits and think about a very conservative estimate on building permits, and then also use a conservative estimate of occupancy of those units, it leads us to kind of at the least 1%. And in the recent plan, we're actually looking more at 1.2% growth.
Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I'd like to at least arrive at a projected number that we could use for the time being and maybe come back and revisit on Thursday. But you haven't answered my question. Why does it really matter? Who's counting on this? As you say, the departments are only going to look at see what projects they need. They're on their page right now and how much money is available and whether or not they can access that money. I don't think they care what's happening 4 or 5 years down the road, but I don't know. I could be wrong. Any other thoughts?
Chair, I might suggest that we put this in the parking lot for right now, for the sake of today's conversation, and that I do appreciate and value the concern that Kim is bringing. I would ask that based on the amount of data that we've gathered to come up with this and the amount of people who have been involved, I feel very comfortable moving forward with it, but I understand also Kim's point, or Member Shanahan's point, and I would like to request that Member Shanahan, if you have if you're able to provide some more data that we could use for the population projections that we're using in this model or in this document, that you provide that to us so that we can adjust accordingly. But
so no, I wish I could. You know I can't. It's pretty much anecdotal, but that's really been the function of the CIAC and its history, is to actually poll ourselves as what we think. And obviously data on population growth is impossible to project. Jack, or I'd rather Chair Hyatt, the other phenomena that's perhaps even more not disturbing, but I believe to be inaccurate, is the projection of the number of dwelling units that will come about because of population. And NOAA, I think we're looking at, if you look at that chart that was just put up on the screen, which is that one right there, you see that we've got a big old hump right there in 2020, and then we fall off pretty precipitously from that one.
Yeah. Right.
And the bottom of that on the right-hand side is about what you would need at a 1% growth rate, right? So if you pull that up, Carlos, you can see that 400 or 500 units.
Yeah.
And if you've got a 1% growth rate in a town of 85,000 people, that means you're bringing in 850 people a year. If there's 2 people per dwelling unit, that makes sense. But I would suggest that the peak that we're seeing right now is really not population driven. It's pent-up demand driven. It's the fact that we've got a deficit of housing units anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 units that we've been talking about for years. And that it's going to be some time before we actually have satisfied that pent-up demand. So I would actually suggest that peak that we see does not fall off in a year or two. It plateaus for 2 or 3 years as we continue to try to meet the existing pent-up demand, and then it falls off in a much slower rate before it actually goes back down to that 1%. So, and that really is the number that actually has more of an impact on fees to be collected, because it really is about those dwelling units. The other thing to point out about those dwelling units that we see is that peak right now is that that's primarily multifamily. And when we look historically in the past, over the last 15 years, we have always built way more single family detached than we have multifamily. And so that peak that we're seeing right now is the multifamily boomlet that we're experiencing right now. And that's really got another year or two to run. We still have at least 1,500 dwelling units that are in the pipeline that have not yet got to planning commission or have not yet been recorded as plat. And so that really kind of speaks to that plateau that probably will exist for another 2 or 3 years at about 1,000 units a year. But again, when we think about demographics and we think about the millennials who are now, the youngest millennial, I think, is 26, and the oldest one is pushing 40. Those are people who will start doing family formation, and that means a demand for single-family detached, not multifamily. And we very well may get to a point where we start to see a decline in multifamily as we satisfy that pent-up demand, and an increase in the demand of single-family detached, like we may see in Tierra Contenta. And those are the things that will actually start to affect how we collect fees, as those number of dwelling units even more than the population.
All right, Carlos, I'd like to bookmark that and come back to it later on. I understand what Kim's argument is, and I'm inclined to agree, but I don't know that we have to make any decisions now.
Correct. We don't have to make any decisions now. Again, as far as calculations are concerned, the calculations are based on the number of existing units. And I think that that the contractor, Clancy at Duncan Associates, and myself have spent a lot of time entirely revising where our previous numbers have been. And we think we are extremely more accurate than we have been in the past. So we think we've made some real improvements with that. As far as the growth projections, those are something that I think the CIAC should and can absolutely weigh in on. The assumption that dwelling units are going to be decreasing is merely that, an assumption, a very conservative assumption. We can change those things. It would be nice to get some of that information before Thursday, but we always have different room to kind of change this until then and a little bit beyond.
All right. What's the next issue, please?
So the next issue is thinking about impact fee and some of the impacts on the development industry and equity concerns, and to what degree we want to start considering different kinds of discounts. And again, we can have some time to talk about discounts a little more tomorrow, but we definitely want to start that conversation and get kind of considerably through where the CIAC might want discounts to be.
So Chair High, we've never had that discussion in the past, and I'm not really sure what we mean by equity and or discounts. And so maybe you could give some examples of what you're thinking, Carlos?
Sure. So currently we are required to evaluate the equity concerns of impact fees and annual report, which is going to be coming due and which we will have to do after the IFCIP. And so from that perspective, from the perspective of maybe if we're concerned about how much we're charging for different types of units, we might want to decrease impact fees. It's not usually very clear how we could use impact fees for equity concerns, but I do still want to kind of bring that up as a conversation that we could have. And then the second one, Kim, can you remind me what the second part of that question was? Oh, well, discount.
Discount.
Yeah, discount. So we don't collect impact fees on affordable housing, and now we've actually started to include multifamily in that waiver process with the new rules of inclusionary zoning. And is that what you mean by discounts and equity?
No. So when I'm talking about discounts, I actually want to get into. I'm going to pull up a slide from a presentation that Clancy is thinking about presenting. So in the past, we have given a 30% discount on impact fees. So in 2014, if we look at this in 2014, we adopted 70% of the maximum calculated fees. So we gave a 30% discount to all land use types and to all impact fee categories. So if we compare this,
let me put that in perspective, if I may, for those who are not on the committee. when we originally created our impact fees, we discounted them 50%. And they stuck at 50% versus the maximum that Clancy had calculated for many, many years. Then when the collapse of 2008 occurred and Jeff Branch was able to lobby Councilor Wurzburger, we waived all impact fees for a while so that Branch could get his apartment project built with no impact fees. The caveat to that waiver of all impact fees during that 2 or 3 year process was that when we came back and brought back impact fees, we would come up to 70%. So even though it was still considered a discount relative to the maximum, we actually raised the impact fees at that point up to that 70% of maximum. So now that you've shared that screen, appreciate that, Carlos, because now I understand what you mean by discount. And the short answer is we have been discounting, always have been discounting relative to the maximum fees. And 70% is as high as we've ever been in terms of relative to maximum. So that's the historical perspective.
And as far as legal concerns, we there isn't a basis at which we should or should not discount impact fees. That really is a political decision, and we are relying on the CIAC to kind of first create that suggestion, and then we'll bring that forward to the Planning Commission, eventually the governing body. But it could be 70%, it could be 50%, it could be 0. If we look, and something I do want to explain a little bit is that despite anything that we've done in the past, we cannot discount based on land use categories. So let me show this again. So we cannot say that we're going to give a waiver to residential units. We cannot do that. We cannot give a waiver to commercial units. We cannot say that office units, that the office space is too expensive when we want to give a waiver to office units. Because of the proportionality that's required in state law, if we do any of that, the city itself has to pay the difference. So if we are giving a 50% reduction in residential impact fees because we want to spur residential development, we would have to pay that difference. And that's really important to understand, okay? So when we think about these land use types here on the left, we cannot take those individually. We cannot be thinking about any of those uses individually. One of the things that we can do is we can decrease the individual funds. So we can say, maybe roads can't spend their money enough and they don't need impact fees. And so we can decrease roads fees individually, or parks, or fire, or police. Those are things that we can look at. Those are things that we can deal with.
Does it go the other way? Can we increase roads if we wanted to 100?
We can, right? So roads could be 100, and parks can be 50, and fire could be 75, and police can be 10.
But they have
that
to
is really up to the
all,
CIAC.
but they have to correspond to all usage categories if we do that. In other words, roads go up for commercial, retail, churches, whatever. Okay.
Correct.
Interesting.
Carlos, in looking at the materials, there were two things that stuck out to me. One was that as I looked at those, the equity issue, it seemed as though in building a less expensive house, you ended up paying much more percentage of your costs than you would if you had a high-end house. And that didn't seem equitable to me. It would seem like it would be wiser for us to, I don't know, have more of the money come off the top in the expensive homes than in the less expensive homes. Am I off base?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Yes.
So well, Jack, honestly, we've been dealing with that issue since this commission was formed. And the reality is that when you say cost, you're only presuming that the cost is relative to square footage. And Mark Beneclesen, our realtor friend, used to point out all the time that very often the biggest houses have the fewest people in them for the fewest amount of times in the year.
Right.
And the smallest houses often have the most people in them, and therefore have a larger impact on roads and parks and fire and police. And so Clancy Mullen has checked us on our impulse to try to be more equitable consistently. And that, unfortunately, has been the issue that we've had to swallow all these years.
So, Carlos, I would think that that's a reasonable point to fit into the report at some point in time, because it's going to come up, certainly in the Planning Commission. I know 3 or 4 commissioners will likely raise that issue. And I think that's a good point to find a way to filter that into the report. The other issue in looking at that was that the studies from around the country would seem to indicate that regardless of what you're charging or not charging in terms of impact fees, it doesn't seem to have a great deal of impact on the actual growth, the actual development process at all. And did I read that correctly? Did you see that as well?
That's what I read.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We had Clancy Mullen at Duncan Associates do a study about our different impact fee reductions in 2015, and he went back and was looking at national data and at local data. There is, however, a difference between kind of impacts on kind of the longer scale and impacts that are kind of unforeseen. And that's why the land use department is recommending that we maintain impact fees similar to kind of where they're at for some amount of time before we could kind of present what increases could look like.
Okay. All right. What do you need to wrap up this?
Brian, was there
Brian, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that, whether we discount or not, of course, is a complicated issue and it's hard to know the exact impact of that. But I tend to agree with Member Shanahan on we're probably gonna have a lot of growth. And I think it's better that we prepare for that and, appropriately utilize the funds, but that's to say that we can't just continue to sit on balances. And I think that's the thing I'm most concerned about. And, I know that we're well intentioned to try to put it out the door, but I would never want to increase what we charge and then sit on it. So we need to be sure that we actually start deploying the money. And I think we've, Carlos, you've done a great job putting together schedules of what projects are kind of in the wings, and clearly there's a need for the money. So it's a matter of, can we get it out the door, and then how do we revisit what level we charge, and maybe that gets revisited each year as we see and have a better sense of what actual development is happening.
Good point.
So Mr. Lewis, I mean, we have to remember that there's a relationship between our funds and the IFCIP, the bond that will come forward. And, none of our money ever will trigger any projects.
Agreed.
They are only there to sweeten projects.
Yep.
And to Ike's point about the city and its financial problems that it's in, if it does not have the wherewithal to find the money to do projects, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Our money won't get spent.
No, we can't fund a project on our own.
That's correct. That's correct. All we can do is add to the deficit that may exist with other projects that the city should be doing. And that's why the IFCIP and the priorities and all that sort of stuff, which we can talk about tomorrow perhaps, are so critical, because ultimately the city has to do them. They got to do them. They got to, and and now we've just lost our roads guy, John Romero, and that means that department is kind of twisting in the wind probably a little bit. So I don't know. It's a tough place that we're in. Anyway, moving on.
All right, Carlos.
I just wanted to bring up real quick an example of how we think about EDUs are kind of expected versions of dwelling units. You could almost think of it kind of as FTEs. And so when we're looking at both functional populations for fire and police costs, and then also mainly when we're looking at parks costs, we're really looking at, these are some calculations that, that the contractor does, is looking at how each of these kind of units has an effect on services. And so unfortunately, you know, we can't charge uses that can't charge wealthy or larger uses more money than what we could calculate them as actually burdening the city with. And so there really has to be that strong nexus there.
Okay. All right, what's next?
Well, one thing I think that would be important is kind of starting to discuss a little more. I think one question I have for the members, going off of Member Lewis, what do you need from the different departments to kind of demonstrate their ability to use funds? And to preempt that a little bit, so I've put together the eligible projects. Each of the departments has sent me a memo so far, kind of highlighting some of their context. I could show you this. This is kind of an important sheet to look at. And so if you look at this sheet, you could see what the utilization of funds has been over the last 7 years. And so you could see that roads has utilized about 55% of their funds, parks and trails about 5% of their funds, fire and EMS about 33% of their funds, and police a little less than 1% of the funds. And so that's been the past utilization. And so I've asked each of the departments to kind of discuss what the context is with this past utilization, how they've been able to use funds in the past, and what their capacity is to be able to use funds moving forward. And so I'm just getting some of those documents right now. I could send those out for tomorrow's meeting. I'm planning on having the departments available so that you could discuss with different project managers and what that capacity might be. But I do want to spend some time today to figure out, are there other materials we need to know? First, to kind of get to Member Lewis's point around not wanting to charge fees and sitting on it.
Not sure. What? I didn't hear all that.
So I think
charging fees and what?
And then sitting on it.
Oh yeah. No, I agree. And when you look at this, it feels like, you know, somebody's head ought to roll in the police department if they're not spending their money. I don't get it.
No, Jack, you have to remember that the police can only spend their money on a building.
Right.
The fire department, for instance, can buy a big expensive fire truck and claim that it's going to last 10 years or more and therefore eligible.
Right.
The police doesn't buy anything that lasts 10 years. And so unless you're building a new police station, they don't really have any place to spend it. So what's been interesting, though, is parks. Parks, historically, especially because we had $30 million to spend there for quite a while, they didn't feel like they needed us. And now, all of a sudden, though, parks is suggesting that their impact fees should double. And so apparently Parks has decided they got all kinds of things that they want to start spending money on. And frankly, that has a lot to do with who's running the department today, as opposed to who was running the department a few years ago. And so some of these numbers have explanations like that. That's why fire actually has a pretty good percentage of their spending, even though they don't have a lot of money. And Parks is the one that kind of jumps off the page for me, Carlos, about having a different intention about what they think they can do with impact fees, given the fact that they now want to double them compared to where they have been in the past.
Do you think,
So
Kim, that some of their requests at Parks are inappropriate?
Well, I don't know if they're inappropriate. It seems to me that Parks has got a lot on their plate that they want to do relative to what they've got in terms of what they want to double impact fees. The question always with Parks, however, is who maintains them? And we've had this discussion for a long time. Mike's very familiar with it. It's like, do we really need parks if nobody is going to maintain them? And no impact fees can go to park maintenance ever. And so I question whether or not Parks really understands this. when I met with the parks director, the current parks director, less than a year ago, 6 months ago, he didn't even know that he had the ability to collect money out of an impact fee fund. He had been at the city for over a year and didn't even know that there was money out there that he was able to tap into. And I think that now that he's seen that there's some money to tap into and that we could actually maybe even get some more, he's getting a little like a kid in the candy shop. I don't know.
And
I'd like to add on to what Kim said.
Go ahead.
In the bad old days of the parks audit 10 years ago,
Right.
we had to prove out every penny that had been spent and who had spent it on what. It was during that period that I learned that we had 57 parks, and I walked in every one of them. When we had 34 miles of trail and median that we maintained, and we had a crew of 5 to do it. So I don't know that things have changed that dramatically over the last 5 years. I think that the park maintenance has improved, and as you noted, park maintenance can't be part of the budget on these projects. But I challenge whoever says we need to add impact fees or double them or do whatever, to actually be able to have the knowledge to show you how many parks are affected and where they're located and who they serve and why they were put in the location they were placed. Yeah, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. I unfortunately learned back a few years ago. But I can tell you that doubling parks without a staff to do it. Do you know at the golf course right now, they're running that place with 4 people?
Yeah.
4 people for the whole
The whole complex.
the softball,
Yeah.
the whole thing, the golf course, 4 people. That's ridiculous.
count-
We used to hire 4 guys just to mow greens.
Is that counting Jack?
Yeah. No, I'm not working anymore. So let me just try to set up tomorrow, Carlos. Now, you say all 4 of these folks will be here?
there will be multiple people from each of the departments, I believe.
Well, maybe we should take them a little bit at a time and not have them all stacked up and waiting for us. Do you want to prioritize them?
We do only have today and tomorrow to kind of discuss what plan you're going to get on Thursday. So that is where I want to make sure that, we've gone through some of the big picture issues already. We've pretty much gone through the entire, everything we had to talk about today. And so I do want to make sure that we're able to talk some about what we're planning to talk about tomorrow.
All right, well, let me ask you this.
So even getting some of these questions is really helpful to pass on so that people are prepared tomorrow.
Are we expected on Thursday to give a list of all the potential eligible projects from each of the departments? And if so, are we going to prioritize them?
So the IFCIP does not prioritize projects. And so attached is the latest kind of department updated eligible projects list. Do notice that fire and police, I've been working with them for months to try to understand impact fees, what is eligible, and to really be thinking about this. Just on Friday, we got updates from them with new types of equipment that they want to propose as eligible. Now, I want to make sure that the eligible projects list that moves forward on Thursday doesn't include anything that is clearly ineligible. But when we get into the details, when we really get into the details of these kinds of items, I've been encouraging the departments to just put together enough that the CIAC can figure out if it's questionably or potentially eligible. Once we actually have, once there's actually the need, there could be more justification to figure out whether the specific projects are. So for instance, for fire station number 5, a remodel, there's a big question. Well, remodeling just on the surface is not eligible, but parts of that can be. Will they be able to get $4.8 million of actually eligible project expenditures? Maybe, maybe not. And so to some degree, that's a question for a later date. If the fire department actually comes forward with fire station number 5, we'll have to work with them about that. And the CIAC will evaluate the specific proposal. But for now, what we're just looking for Thursday is to make sure that these kinds of projects here seem to be eligible. And that if there's more questions, we might want to discuss those either tomorrow or after Thursday, kind of between Thursday and the last time the CIAC sees this in mid-November. Another thing I do want to bring up around parks is that parks, the management of parks has pretty much changed since the reorg. I think Noah or Eli could put an exact date, but in the last couple of months, Parks is now being managed by Melissa McDonald and Regina Wheeler. And the previous kind of Parks management did not come up with the same level of projects and was not really able to spend much of the impact fees. The new managers of Parks have I think it's something around $1.4 million that they're prepared to spend in the next couple months. And so a very, very big difference from the kind of the previous parks managers and the current parks managers.
And Chair, I'd also like to just point out that, and kind of piggybacking off of what Carlos said, is that the city has had a lot of turnover. And every time we have turnover in any of these areas, we have to educate, let them know it's there. That was part of the problem that happened with the previous Parks and Rec administration. They just didn't know this even existed. So then to educate them on how it can be used, what type of funding there is, and then they have a list that was created by people who were before them. And so I think that one of the main things is a lot of these projects are on here, but they're not funded in full. So we put these projects on here and none of the amount in any of the line items can really cover a full project being done. So that means that the other part of this is the city allocating money during their budgeting cycle for these projects. And some of these projects hasn't made it onto their, priority lists, for example. But we will have a new traffic engineer, and then we'll have to have this traffic engineer understand the roads part of this and what roads projects are in the pipeline. So,
well, I'm not clear, Carlos and Noah, about how we're going to do this tomorrow in order to use our time and their time efficiently. Are we going to look at this list and decide the good projects versus the bad projects, or are we going to cross-examine them to see if they really should be on this list? I mean, help me figure out what we're going to try to accomplish tomorrow.
So I think tomorrow what would be good is it would be good for the members to go through these lists and figure out if there's some real concerns with the eligible projects that they're proposing. I think that would be good to kind of prepare beforehand. It would be wonderful to be able to get some of those questions before from CIAC members. I could send that to the department heads, get some more information and bring it back to the CIAC, in which case we might not actually need to use meeting time to really go through the particular projects. So for an example, new restrooms. Right, so Parks is proposing new restrooms here. One of the projects is downtown at the Water Street parking lot, Sir Letty Park, and so they want to be able to expand a bathroom. If the CIAC members had some questions about that, you might be able to send that to me. I might be able to make sure that Parks is aware that there are some questions about this. We might be able to get you some more information. That would be a really good thing to know.
Carlos, I have some real problems with what the process that you just described. The fact is that everything that is on these lists is a good project. Every one of them has a demonstrable need, and it's sort of like the roads. We a couple of years ago, I think maybe during Ike's time, we thought we needed $240 million worth of road improvements in the city of Santa Fe, and nobody really argued with it. We also recognized we just didn't have the money. So as opposed to having problems with things, to Jack's question about priority, whether it's legitimate for CIAC to actually weigh in on priority, if we don't, who does? Who is the prioritizer? Is it the staff of the department heads? Is it the city council? I can't imagine it being the city council, because then it really gets political. So who does establish the priorities when we have, $20 million worth of a CIP bond, and we've got $100 million worth of demonstrable need? For us to be able to think that we can choose which ones we don't think are good or we have problems with is really putting a great onus on us when we could honestly say they're all legitimate.
Chair, Commissioners, let me just intervene really quick here. I don't think we're asking to say what's good and bad. I think that's not. I think department heads decide on what projects they need to move forward by obviously working with the city manager and the mayor and whatnot, and they get the ultimate say on approving these project lists. I think what we're asking is, are these projects eligible projects to be on this list, or are they not? Right. So, is a restroom in a park an eligible project according to the statute that governs this board? Is that an eligible project? Because there's a lot of wants out there. A lot of departments want things, but they need the guidance from this committee to decide, is this a project that can be associated with growth and does qualify for this type of funding, for impact fee funding? So I think that's really what the ask is here. Is this list a priority list, or is this a political list, but rather, is this list and each of these projects eligible to take money from the impact fee funds for these projects? I think that's what we're asking you to do. And Carlos, you can correct me if we're wrong.
Well, no,
I think that's exactly right.
Well, even if we agreed that, like for instance, in roads, every one of those, and I've looked at them, every one of them can be rationalized as a response to growth. We've got Henry Lynch Road on there. Henry Lynch Road exists, but it's 2-lane and it goes down to a 3-way stop. So clearly it probably should be improved because there's so much more growth and traffic occurring around that area. So I just don't know how we can, determine that something may not be eligible based on whether it's a response to growth or not. It's hard. It's a hard one. It's a very hard one. And therefore, the priority really becomes the more of the issue, because we know that we can't do them all in this time frame that we're looking at.
Right, and anyway. Chair, Commissioner, and Member Shanahan, I think that it's hard for us to, and it should be hard for you guys to say this is a priority project or this isn't, because we could say that Tierra Contenta, the spine of Tierra Contenta, is a priority project, but if it doesn't have funding associated with that past this board, then we can't really make that determinant. We shouldn't prioritize projects necessarily. I think each of the departments prioritizes projects when they pass their budgets or when they pass bonds, and those are the projects. And when they amend this list to include a new project, which they, like South Meadows, for example, that was a project that got changed very quickly. So I think I understand the concern, and I appreciate the points that are being raised, and the very good ones. But I think that really, if we can try to, look at this through a lens and determine if it is still a project that should receive funding, I think that really needs to be the focus, or if it's not.
Well, what's changed? Kim, I remember going to this committee with a project request ready to go. We didn't go and ask you for priority. We went in and asked to approve the project so we could build it. And then we took CIP money, the annual CIP lead off from the big bond issue. And that's how we funded it. But I don't recall that we ever went in asking for priorities to be prioritized on anything. We had a lot of proving up to do in order to even get considered for recommendation for funding.
Excuse me just a minute.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's kind of what I was suggesting in my email the other day, is that, do we as a body, as a citizen body, actually want to try to step out of that past practice into a new one where we do think about priorities, when we can think about that some of the things like roads actually might stimulate some growth and some production of housing. And we've never done that before. We've also given money to things that never got done. Matt O'Reilly came to us a number of years ago and asked for $1 million for a new transit center over in the Valdez Office Park that has never been built. Never been built, and it's not even on an eligible project anymore, as far as I can tell.
And I will say the money has been withdrawn, and I believe Regina Wheeler at the Public Works Department is actually writing a memo talking about how that project is underway. Not
okay.
Shovels in the ground, but I think it is underway.
Okay, back to Ike's point. Let me just focus on this. So, Ike, my recollection is the same as yours. In my experience on this committee, departments would come and they'd say, here's what we want. And they'd come in with generally one project and for a specific amount of money. And we'd analyze it and figure out that they did their due diligence, and then we'd authorize it. I don't remember ever not authorizing it if the money was there. So prioritize.
We don't.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but Jack, we don't. That is our basic routine job.
Right.
But every 6 or 7 years, we're actually asked to take a look at the IFCIP.
Right.
And so those are things that are in addition to our regular duties of yay or nay on departments that come to us with a project. And they never come to us with, do you like project A or do you like project B? Yeah. That's never been the case in our routine work. But now we are in a place where we're doing something that's not our routine work. It's the task that we have episodically every 5, 7, 10 years or whenever we get around to doing it. That's what's different with this.
Well, I'm a little confused, Carlos, about looking at the state statute and trying to apply the statute to these projects. Shouldn't this be a product of the legal department?
There is an element which is kind of just legal department, just looking at this from a legal perspective, and staff is to some degree trying to work to make sure that the departments are creating proposed eligible projects that work. I would imagine that the CIAC will not have too many, or if any, concerns about any of the eligible projects lists on here. But I do just want to make sure that the CIAC is looking at this and again, figuring out if there are glaring errors that you think that staff may have missed. If there are projects that you think are clearly not eligible, we would want to have some kind of information about that before Thursday, before kind of we move forward. If there are not immediate issues on this, we do not need to address that right now. That would be something that we would address when projects actually come forward. To member Shanahan's point about prioritization, a capital improvement plan certainly could prioritize these projects and figure out when will they actually be done, what is feasible, and what the priorities are. Currently, that's not part of the IFCIP. It could be, but it's not right now. And so we are not asking for prioritization of any of these lists right now, although that could be something the CIAC voluntarily decided to work on later.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
It seems to me, I mean, I've been through this and others could feel free to weigh in. I mean, you can make a rational case that any of these are related to what we're supposed to do. And of course, some of that will depend at the time. Some of these are scheduled for a long time from now, kind of whether that's within our jurisdiction, whether we think that makes sense. But for the purposes of tomorrow, it seems like an unnecessary use of time to have every department head come in to talk about these, given generally they fall under the right, buckets that we're looking at. And the bigger question here, and the thing I would want to know most is, well, where are you going to get the other funding from? How realistic are any of these projects? But that's also not something we need to address right now, given we're not suggesting we're going to approve them. It's just that they might be a project that would be a fit for us sometime in the future. It seems pretty nebulous, and I don't know that we need to belabor the point any further.
The way I feel too, Carlos. I mean, I can't imagine between now and tomorrow coming up with, going through all of these, coming up with a specific reason why one of these shouldn't be considered. I don't feel like I don't want to say qualified, but I just, I don't think I could put my finger on one and say, oh no, you can't have this, because I think they should be allowed, the departments, to bring whatever they can forward, and that may fail later on down the road. But I'm okay with that. And I agree with Brian. I don't want to waste their time tomorrow, and I'd rather help you move on with putting it all together.
Sure. And that's
Ike's on board. Kim? Yo, Kim.
I'm unmuted. I'm unmuted. I'm starting to make some dinner. I didn't want to interrupt. But yeah, no, I agree with you, Jack.
Okay. All right. So with our respects to them, Carlos, I don't think we need to do that. We can accept this, I think, as the projects. Now, what would that do for tomorrow? What would you then want to do with tomorrow's time?
So with tomorrow's time, I'm still expecting if the CIAC still wants to meet with department heads, not to talk about eligible projects, but instead to talk about capacity to utilize funds, we can do that. Then there's also the question
Wait, stop right there. Stop right there. Go back to the chart. What do you mean by them utilizing the funds? I mean, for a variety of reasons, nobody's used 100% of their money. I personally, I'd like them to use 100%. But do you think we're going to give them direction and guidance on, jacking up the ways they ask for money or something? What do you want? What are you trying to look for?
Well, I think that's a perfect directing question, because all of that is going to come back to kind of this is when we adopt fees.
Yeah.
Again, what we are going to be looking for tomorrow is, what do we want those fees to be adopted at? If is roads going to be 80 and parks be 45 and fire 50 and police 70? Or are those going to be different numbers?
When we go back to your other chart. Go back to the other chart.
Okay.
The percentage, that one. Now, what sense does it make for me to say to the roads department, you only spent 55% of your money? Is that since 2014? Is that what we're saying?
That is. Okay.
You've only spent 55% of your money since then, so we're going to drop you down to 55% of that. That doesn't make sense to me. Does that make sense to you? Is that what we're trying to accomplish?
It doesn't mean that we have.
So Jack, if I may, just as kind of a worst case scenario, when we ask, could you spend this money on your projects? The CIP is paid back, the bond is paid back by gross receipts. Given what we had talked about earlier, what Ike brought up, and what stress that we are in with the decline of gross receipts from tourism and hospitality, it's not inconceivable that the city council could say, you know what, why don't we just pass on the 2-year CIP for a couple of years and not do anything? Because we need every bit of gross receipts we can get. And we can't afford to use gross receipts to pay back a bond when we're already running deficits in our budgets anyway.
Okay.
And so in that situation, if that would actually occur, then it doesn't matter how much money we're collecting, because there aren't any projects to take it to. Now, that's a really scary proposition, but it's not inconceivable given where we are with the larger city budget and gross receipts.
I'd say it's likely, but let me ask Carlos or Noah, are any of these projects going to be able to go forward without additional funding from the city?
Yes, I believe there are some eligible projects that would be able to move forward without any funding from the city. I think fire and police might have a couple projects that could feasibly move forward without any other funding. And then there are also other projects where, so for instance, the parks bathroom project, they're looking for $350,000. They have everything else satisfied. They're looking for $350,000. If this project is eligible, then they're subsequently going to come and request $350,000 from the CIAC.
You know, you have talked about that project specifically a couple of times. Is there something that you think does not make that project eligible?
No, that was simply a specific and quite involved project that I had to take a large part in to help them work on the eligibility requirements behind it. That's it.
Okay.
When did they declare a parking lot to be a park?
Well, it's actually there's a small park on the corner, which is
Yeah,
officially
Fountainhead Park.
What's that?
Fountainhead Park.
Yeah.
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 Well, you know, maybe Kim's point is well taken. Maybe we should hear from finance as to whether or not that scenario, that doomsday scenario, is really what's on the horizon. Because if it is, we could have a very serious discussion with the department head and say, you know, pick a couple of projects that you think you can pay for on your own, because you're not going to get any money from the gross receipts fund. I mean, paying back the bonds and so forth.
And so I think
the Development Fees Act basically says you got 7 years to spend the money you collect.
Right.
And so it's not inconceivable that we could actually continue to collect impact fees for a couple of years while we've got no projects going down the pipe.
Right.
And then when they do feel like comfortable about, you know, passing a CIP bond to do infrastructure stuff, we got more money to throw at it. So I think you're on the right track though, Jack, by suggesting that finance may be more relevant to the discussion than department heads who don't really know if they're going to be able to spend money on anything.
Well, also to your point about the 7 years, it seems to me that, Carlos, it's worth our time, or your time actually, to go back and figure how soon is money that was collected 7 years ago going to come due and have to spend it or lose it. And because in my mind, if that's the case, I feel a much greater need to identify a project that can come down the road right away and spend that money so we don't have to lose it.
It's more complicated than that, Jack, honestly. And it's that 7 year thing was always out there as you better get moving. But the reality is that we have commingled all the collections that we have made over all these years, because the 7 year thing means that you give the money back to the people who you collected it from.
Right.
And because we've commingled those things, we got no idea who, how, or we could ever give it back to anybody.
That's the Ike Pino Doomsday Project, which is what's going on in the finance department. Well, okay, yeah, I think that we would benefit more from just talking to the finance person. And are we getting ahead of finance or just somebody else?
I believe we're getting someone else from finance that might be able to come and speak. But I'll make sure to raise that question first.
Go ahead, Ike.
They have a lot of fresh faces over there. I'd kind of like a veteran who understands all of this. There's got to be one left in the whole department.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't recognize any of them.
I don't know. I'm not being sarcastic. They've had tremendous turnover.
No, right. Noah, do you know anybody over there? You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, Chair. I think that you kind of know the answer to that question. But I would go ahead and say that there's probably not anybody with a lot of history on this who works there anymore. I think most have retired or transferred or left the city.
Okay. Well, You know, I really do hate to take up department heads' times and all that with trying to make something out of this mishmash. And I do think that we would benefit most from finance, but let's hear from finance first tomorrow. And I don't know, unless the committee feels otherwise, I'd like to just focus on finance and then let Carlos draft and continue to draft. What is it that you expect on Thursday, Carlos?
Thank you for the question. So on Thursday, I am hoping to have if not a draft resolution and ordinance, something very close to that. On Thursday, we will have a proposal for the discount rates. We'll have all the eligible projects together. We'll have a draft plan. We'll have the land use assumptions. So all of the principal elements of the IFCIP will be complete. Now, we've talked before, it would be a complete draft. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be a finished, completed document, but it would be a completed document. And again, our plan is to basically, if we can get a recommendation from the CIAC on Thursday, we'll be submitting the next day for staff review.
Let's go back to the percentages again, because we haven't put much flesh on that, and then maybe we can end this today, but I think we should talk about that again tomorrow. Do you have a recommendation, Carlos?
We don't have a recommendation yet. I think one thing that I will really want to hear from CIAC is whether we should approximately approach kind of residential impact fees right now. If that is our goal, then regardless, so I've got the calculation over here that I'm sharing screen on. And so you can see, roads is going up 12%, parks up 94%, fire 123. So overall, the average single family detached dwelling unit is going up 44%, right? So we could always decrease that in some way to get similar to the fees we're charging now. And that's kind of what we're planning on doing. And if the CIAC agrees with that, we'll try to work some more on that. What that will do is, if you look over here, residential is all going up, but commercial is almost all going down. And so if we try to set residential fees at kind of a similar level to where we're charging right now, that means that commercial fees, which are all going down, are just going to go down further. And so there is some value judgments that I don't want to assign on to the CIAC to figure out where should staff aim for kind of impact fee adjustments compared to where our current impact fees are now. What is the appetite of the CIAC, and where do we want these fees to be going? Here's where the fees are right now. Here's what we've calculated we can charge. Here's the difference.
All right, let me just one by one. Kim, what do you think?
Sorry, I'm mute again. Well, I think it's important to point out that the rise in residential fees of, I think Carlos said it was about 40%, is almost exclusively on the proposal that is coming from parks. And if we actually were able to kind of check that, and I think Ike's point was well made, is that we got a lot of parks and we can't maintain the ones we got, then they may not go up 40% as an average. So I'm not willing to just say that, okay, residential is going up 40% and therefore commercial won't be going up as much. I don't know. And I'm also not sure if I understand why it would be that residential would be going up and commercial would be going down when we've already been told that they have to be exactly the same in terms of the discount.
Carlos?
I didn't follow that, Carlos.
Yeah, so all of that has to do with the calculation. Again, this is Clancy's materials here, but generally residential fees are increasing because park fees are increasing. and because we also because of inflation costs, the increasing construction cost index, and because the size of different units is increasing. So there's kind of three reasons why residential fees are increasing. For non-residential fees, trip generations have gone down. Also, because we did kind of a comprehensive analysis of the land use assumptions and didn't kind of carry on the old ones, we came up with a very different number for how much commercial square footage we have, which means that we're changing kind of the entire way that we're calculating commercial. And so fees are going down because we've gotten more accurate in our data, which might be a little bit confusing, but kind of, an unforeseen change to the calculations that, again, we don't have a lot of control over.
So how was it that Clancy was able to determine that vehicle miles have reduced? I mean, it seems to me that these are things that, John Romero would tell us, not Clancy. So how is it that we trust Clancy's presumptions on these sorts of things? And when we calculate how much actual square footage of commercial that we truly, really actually have, and how does Clancy know?
I'll let Clancy speak to that. He should be on the call tomorrow, and he should be able to go through a presentation talking about all of the subject.
Is Clancy first?
I was originally thinking that Clancy might be first to kind of introduce the overall kind of analysis of what the CIAC can do and where fees are going, and then kind of let finance and the departments respond to that. I'm open to suggestions.
Well,
I have a question that might be a little bit out of context.
Go ahead.
When all this finally arrives at council, because it does arrive at council at some point, the 4 new councilors or the 4 first termers and the mayor being a first termer, do they know from CIAC, from CIP, from XYZ? Have they been informed so that they're just waiting for information? Or are you guys going to show up and there's, what are you talking about?
It's the latter.
I think there's always the worry that counselors may not be as aware about the details. That's one of the reasons for the CIAC, is to make sure that there's individuals who could kind of get into the details. And each of the CIAC members are appointed by the mayor and one counselor to kind of be a representative for that. We are trying to have and kind of give them as much information as possible. And so there are counselors and the mayor who are aware of what this issue is. And part of that is also going to be kind of the presentation that I'll be tasked with giving, to make sure that the counselors are aware and kind of understand the complexities of this plan as much as they're willing to engage with.
Okay.
Speaking of tomorrow, does anybody have a preference whether we hear first from finance or first from Clancy?
I'd like to close the loop on finance so that we know what we're
Okay,
dealing with.
all right, let's start with finance and then Clancy. And I'm still not sure that we need the department heads at all, Carlos.
Okay. Agree with that.
I think probably with those two, we ought to be able to have a full and complete discussion. I'd like not to take more than an hour and a half. We're at an hour and a half now, and I'd like to close soon. But I think we'll probably get engaged in a lot of conversation, particularly with Clancy, about some of his assumptions and how he got there. But, we've always had a lot of confidence in Clancy, so I don't see any reason to lose it now. But and coming back to your chart right now, go ahead, go back to the chart. The permitted dwellings issue on the left side, I don't know. Maybe we should just talk that over with Clancy tomorrow. Excuse me. I have the COVID.
I will say Clancy had nothing to do with the land use assumptions. Well,
Okay.
no, Clancy had a lot to do with the land use assumptions, had very little to do with permitted dwelling units.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take it up again tomorrow, and I'm not sure where, but I'm sure we'll work it into the conversation. Is there anything else you wanted to accomplish today?
I think again, just getting a little bit more of a suggestion on where we should go with impact fees in relation to total fees. Would the CIAC like to see, again, you know, things can change tomorrow, but would the CIAC like to see to some degree a fee neutral proposal? Again, fee neutral, not revenue neutral. Remember, Lewis?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
It seems to me that we're going to learn a lot in the next year or two based on kind of how the pandemic shakes out and what other funding will exist for all of these different departments, and therein kind of what we can do in terms of participating alongside. So it feels a little premature to make an absolute decision kind of for the next 7 years based on that. Am I correct in that we could leave it flat effectively and then reevaluate in a year if we needed to?
Exactly.
That seems to be the most prudent starting point in my mind, with a lack of other information. Kind of don't rock the boat too much for now. And then in a year, if we realize, hey, gross receipts are totally tanking, there's no way all these projects are going to get any sort of other funding, we might want to pull the fees back, given we won't be able to participate in any event. Otherwise, if things start to kind of normalize, we can revisit if we should increase the fees, if that's appropriate, if we have enough funds to support what's going on. But that's just my take from kind of what you've shared so far.
Yeah, given the circumstances, I'm more of a let's stay where we are program person right now. Ike, do you have a preference?
I think we stay where we are. All the reports that I hear on the finances, that the collections are way off on everything, no matter which tax you want to talk about. So I kind of like to have some discussion about that tomorrow.
Yeah. Kim?
Well, I'm not sure what Brian was referring to, presumption of population growth or dwelling units or both.
No, he was talking about the percentages, not the increases. We're talking about, Carlos asked for some clarification or input.
Yeah, the percentages to me are coincidental. They are not drivers of anything, as far as I'm concerned. They are what we've determined after we look back, and they aren't really germane to how we look forward necessarily. So and therefore I guess I would say that we can be neutral on that.
All right. Well, let's plan on neutral for a while, Carlos, and see if that gives you enough to move forward.
That certainly does. Certainly does.
Now, do we expect member Alt to be with us tomorrow?
I don't believe member Alt will be able to be with us tomorrow. Haven't heard back, honestly. Member Thompson, I think, should be available tomorrow. And then I still don't have final numbers on who will be available on Thursday.
Okay. And when we get to a vote, do we have enough for a righteous committee?
We should have quorum on Thursday.
All right. Good. Anything else from the members? Noah, did you have something?
Yeah, Chair, thank you, board members. Carlos, I also think that we could look at using some of the funding for a stenographer also. That's in this administrative costs would cover a stenographer.
Yeah.
So
I thought that was part of our letter to what we're going to do, a memo to Isaac. I mean to Eli.
There was talk of about the CIAC putting together a request that Eli use that administrative fees to help out the CIAC. My impression was that CIAC members were going to work on that first.
Oh, no, Carlos, it's you.
This is a reminder. This is Chair Hyde. This is a reminder. The Development Fees Act allows 3% of what we collect to be used for administrative purposes.
Right.
Reed Liming stopped taking that money because he was funded in a different way by the city. But we got 3% of what do we got in that fund now? Almost $3 million bucks.
7.3 million.
Yeah, we ought to be able to afford a stenographer. I don't think Melissa costs that much.
And more. You know, I mean, we could even do somebody to help gather the statistics for Carlos.
Carlos, I think that you could go ahead and you and I can get offline with this conversation, but we could probably go ahead and reach out to the stenographer to see if they're available tomorrow, and then we can go ahead, they can bill us after the hand.
Good job. Thank you, Noah.
You're welcome. And then I'll reach out. I think both Carlos and I will reach out to the other board members because this is really important stuff and really
That's a good idea
to participate. So I think we can count this as if we heard nothing from them, it has to be counted as an unexcused absence for a formal meeting. But we should emphasize that if you want to be excused, you have to get that from the chair and to the staff liaison. Notify both of them so that they don't get an unexcused absence. And from the likes of it, Chair, I don't believe you or Carlos heard from two of the members who weren't able to attend, correct?
I couldn't hear you. What did you say?
I'm sorry. I said, did you or Carlos hear from any of the members who did not attend the meeting?
No, I have not.
So those are unexcused absences.
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did get a message from Monica that she wasn't able to attend. But it was just won't attend on Monday response on Outlook.
All right.
Okay.
I don't have my agenda in front of me. Carlos, is there anything else?
Last is matters from the commission.
Matters from the committee. Anybody?
I have nothing.
Okay.
So Jack, there is one thing I need to say, and I sort of joked with you about it the other day on the phone. The notion of prioritizing, especially when it comes to roads, jumps out at me as a worthy column issue. I will wait before I write it, but I'm going to write a column about the fact that Paseo del Sol is, in my mind, the highest priority of any road that is an eligible project. So just want to disclose that for all the other members on the committee that I reserve the right to be able to do that.
Okay, now all the members should know that any discussions about Paseo del Sol and Tierra Contenta, I can't be involved with. So we're going to need another chair during those conversations. So Ike, would you be willing to take that responsibility?
Well, typically I would, Jack. I'm going to be screeching from one meeting to this.
Okay.
Because of having to go to bank college.
Okay.
So
Chair,
yeah.
I might just suggest Member Lewis if he's willing to co-chair.
Yeah, I think so, because Kim has I don't want to say an axe to grind, but he's got some real strong feelings. Brian, can you do that when it comes to it? Okay.
I'd be happy to.
All right, good. All right. Seeing no other business, then we'll adjourn till tomorrow. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.